I'm Christoph von Tomme, and welcome to the API Resilience Podcast. If you've ever wondered what it really is we do when we do APIs, and if you've wondered how APIs change organizations, our communities, and our society, look no further. This is the podcast you've been searching for. Welcome to the API Resilience Podcast. Today, I'm super excited to have Daria Lutchenko as my guest. Daria is the documentation lead at Up42 and a multilingual technical writer who wrote documentation for education, crowdsourcing, advertising, and geospatial services. Daria has experience with both developer and user-facing documentation and has opinions about both Markdown and Beta. Welcome, Daria. In the Drupal community, we have this where people would create a module. I don't know if you're familiar with Drupal. It's a big open source project, lots and lots of people, thousands of modules, a little bit like WordPress from that perspective. Or like the App Store is the same. Like you have an initial barrier to entry because you have to reach a certain quality standards. Then you submit it. And then you're like, oh, I'm really excited. And then we're going to make lots of money here. And then it didn't work. And then you can still keep it up because maybe things don't fall apart right away. But I don't know when do you start cutting stuff out of your marketplace? And yeah, so there's problems around that where being clear about what is the value that people get out of your marketplace on all the sites is really important, because if there's not enough value flowing, then you just end up with a bunch of empty placeholders or like backlinks, because then basically your marketplace becomes a backlink to your competition. It's people that are trying to compete with you. Basically, yeah.
I think that we also had a similar issue that we tried to tackle with our documentation inside the team, is that we had a bunch of, so we have basically two types of offerings. It is a data offering, it's called the collection, just spatial collection of data, or it is a process, meaning an algorithm, right, that you apply to data. And so we had a lot of collections. Right now, I think we have around 30 or something. Mm-hmm. And it is very complicated because if you try to conceptualize just spatial, it is people build a satellite. It has this characteristic, it has swath width, acquisition mode. It has all these different other terms, right? And people are not interested in the specifications. They're interested in what they can get. And when you have 40 specifications, some are important to some people, and you cannot decide to drop some of them off. Some of them are important, and some people are just special experts. They need to know these details. But how do you guide the customer towards the value that they can get? So we introduced a reference section in our documentation, but not an API reference, just an educational kind of knowledge base. And we would link these pages on collection pages. So if you have acquisition mode, then you would have a link to that. And then it would have a table of all the different collections and all the modes that they have, so that you could compare. Maybe this collection is not something that you should use, but maybe this one is more appropriate to use case, because for example, if you want to monitor vegetation health and you need to have an RGB band, you don't need other types of bands or something. Just have this, not metrics, but just tables that would compare different offerings based on different specifications. I think it greatly helped our sales team to figure out how to explain the value to customers, and just the customers to do the self-service themselves. Because maybe this collection doesn't have the great characteristic in this specific specification, but it is great for something else. It is great in this specific use case. But you can't expect readers and customers to figure out this stuff by themselves. Otherwise, why are you here for? Why do they need you if they need to figure it out by themselves? And because this industry is so academia heavy, we also needed to get into this stuff, to read research papers, stuff like that.
It feels to me that there's different islands of, we can do this and we can do that, where we develop a bunch of technology specifically for that one purpose. But then another underlying technology evolves that makes it possible to do that also in another way. And now you have like this old methodology of doing things, plus this underlying technology way of doing things that you have to like somehow map to each other. I make it more concrete. Before the internet, the way to find out about phone interfaces, the phone numbers are an interface that allows you to communicate by voice to someone or at a distance. But it is an interface. It used to be an analog interface, but now we've actually turned it also in a digital interface. We still use phone numbers. We still use all the standards that we've developed to do telephone calls. We still use that same thing. Although that we now have VoIP, voice over IP, which is actually the same thing, but we're weird enough. We're using it for online conversations like this one. So so there's been some changes, but we still have phone numbers. We still have that old way of doing things. It's like this old way of doing things has its own special place in our collective culture and mindset. Interface discovery. An interface can be a website, can be an API, can be a phone number, can be a person. Like it could be a salesperson or a support person. Those are all interfaces because there's we have agreed, or you as a company say, we guarantee you that if you reach out in this specific way, if you take up a phone and dial this number, there's going to be a person who's going to answer you and help you solve your problems. So basically, there's a set of agreements about what is our SLA, what's the service level, and what are the services that we'll provide through this specific interface. But this landscape is completely messy, and it's like every single interface has its own little quirks, and even though that all of them are interfaces, and you could actually probably replace all of them with APIs and then build stuff on top of the APIs to replace the thing that we're currently doing. And then if you do that, then maybe we could create better protected companies where maybe we can do even more with that company and its capabilities than before, because now you've made some of these assumptions that have gone into defining certain interface type or abstractions that you've taken away, like what you were talking about earlier, the specifications about what the satellite does in a specific way. Like you're going to drop that if you could have an API that says like how green is a certain area, or like how many trees are there. And then you drop all of this complexity because you just have a very simple interface for that. You're a documentarian. Your job is to help people find the path to value, help people find the solution for the problem that they're trying to address. And right now, those solutions are structured by interface type. Like you have, how can you do things with our APIs? And what APIs do we have? And how do you get access to our APIs and so on? And then maybe you have, how can you do things with our marketplace? And what are the solutions that we have on our marketplace and that we're providing? But actually, if you're trying to do the same thing with the marketplace or your API, actually, you shouldn't have to decide yourself as a customer. You shouldn't have to make that choice. Ideally, the company is telling you, well, this problem you're trying to solve, like it looks like you're trying to solve this problem, and this problem you're trying to solve, well, we have 4 ways to do it. We've got a one-off where we just give you an output, a set of maps. We've got this partner that has built this app that will give you alarms when somebody's burning down the forest in your neighborhood. We've got this API with which you can build something, and then we've got this other thing. But all 4 of them are solutions for that same problem. Mm-hmm. And then what you can then do is you can look at your business from the outside in. It's like, what is it that people want to do with you? What are the affordances that you're offering to the world as a company? What are the capabilities that you have that you're offering to the world? And discovering some of these affordances, because some of these are not even, you don't even know that you have them. It's only when customers start asking like, hey, can I do this with your satellite data? And they're like, oh yeah, actually you could do that. This is how you do it. And figuring out this path of, these are all the ways that you can do things. And this is all the things that you can do. And maintaining those paths, because it's probably the hardest part. That I think is what we do but it's like a mix between marketing and documentarian, I think.
I think we do right now, like I find myself more and more in the shoes of a marketing kind of person. Like I do feel like that everything, like I'm a very, like, for example, visual person, and I don't want to just like text be like plain text and white. We do have different audiences though, right? And I was going through my Dev Portal Awards presentation that I did, and for example, the way that we conceptualized our customer base is that we have two types of different people. We have decision makers. These are people who also want like beautiful stuff. They want to see they want to click a button, they want to see a result of this action. So that's why we have the console. It was like a developer portal, but not like in a documentation sense, but more like in a product sense. So, but it's not where the main traffic is going. So after they've seen it, they liked it and they decided to go with the product, then they would hand it off to developers, right? They would hand it off to their developer teams because like if you're talking about constant monitoring, it is like loads and lots of data. It weighs like terabytes. Like it is it's insanely big. And like just the processes that you do, for example, if you want to monitor something, you ask a company to send a request to the satellite. And there might be like other requests that other companies like sent already. So it is a very also competitive market in this sense. So it is very difficult to navigate it like from below when you're just like a person on the other end, right, of the interface. So it is the developers who are doing the integrations, and it is mostly the SDK, our SDK that they're using. And API, I think it's kind of like interface for developers in this sense. This is the console is for developers. They're like trying it out. They see how it works, but then the pipelines themselves, they already set up with SDKs. I'm constantly like thinking also about like, is there a way for us to bring it all together? In my mind, it is merged. It is that you can go to a console, you can click one button and do like a bulk operation that you would only be able to do with an SDK or an API. You can do it right now, right? But I think it is the goal that we are all aiming at some point, just to bridge this gap between developer and non-developer people. Right now, we do live in a world where it is two different user paths. And we used to have it on the docs. We redid it. It was kind of all like mixed up. You would have documentation articles grouped on the basis of like action. But then when I got on board, it didn't make much sense to me. Like if you are a non-technical person, you don't want to see this like a request. You don't want to see like HTTPS, like just these words typed out. It will scare you. You want to see something beautiful, something pretty, something packaged up. And then if you love it, then you'll hand it all to your developers. Would you consider documentation like an interface? Where you were saying like that, like a customer success like person is like support person is the interface. We are not a person, right? Because like the main feature of documentation that it's timeless, it is all accessible and it's like self-serviceable. What do you think?
It is definitely an interface, but it's a different one because it's like a meta interface. It's like an interface that helps you to create interfaces.
But isn't API also like a meta interface in this sense?
It is. Oh, this is a really good question.
Because you're not like calling the endpoint, right? You're not just doing it like one request per minute or something.
This is the fascinating thing for me. So I'm not a developer. So I'm thinking about this all very, very abstract. But like an API, actually, it really is a contract. Because it does not matter what server it's joining on. It's just like, if you ping this endpoint, we're going to give you an answer in this format. So it is actually an agreement. And I think you could say that the documentation from that is also a promise. From that perspective, is also
right, a social contract, right?
Yes,
it's like trust us that the information that you see is what is actually out there.
If you do what we write out here, it's actually going to work. That's kind of So you're right. It was interesting. I went looking for a definition of interface, and most of it is like the place where two things meet each other. No, it's the agreements that make it possible to meet and that to interact. That's the really fascinating part, I think. if you start thinking about this stuff, especially if like from a symbiotic perspective, or like the symbiosis between trees, forests, and the fungi in the soil, and how they all work together, now that we start learning that some of them are sending chemical signals to other trees to warn them that a virus is coming and stuff like that, which is completely crazy. It feels that what we're doing is we're with APIs, we're wiring up the whole world and integrating value change very, very, very deeply in like a new way. Where before we had similar like wiring up of value networks, but they were always mediated by people. And now you're wiring these value networks that can go at a much faster time scale and much quicker interactions, where the humans are still in the mix to like wire them together, but then once it's wired together, it gets its own autonomous kind of capability.
If we are talking about like promises, social contracts, and like the interaction like with the customer support person, or being like a promise that is given to you, or like you visiting the documentation website, I'm thinking about AI chatbots and AI tools that would help documentarians create documentation in a way that it is a thing that needs to be monitored exactly for that reason. Because like, have you heard about this issue that the person went to the chatbot, they asked whether it can like do this and that, it hallucinated, it came up with a policy, and the social contract was broken because it's something that we already expect by default when interacting this support button at the bottom right corner of your screen, right? And I think the same goes for documentation that we have. There is this thing that we need to monitor closely what we're getting out there. The more we start to integrate AIs into our workflows, into our pipelines, like right now in my team, we don't use it too much. We use it like from time to time, but like manually, like not on a regular basis. For example, Tom Johnson, right? He was talking about how he could create an entire documentation, like a draft of the entire documentation, right? By using AI and editing it then, but it puts more pressure on us to be these verifiers of truth and to make sure that this promise is not broken.
Cory Doctorow, he wrote that basically if the AI is in the driving seat, and I'm paraphrasing, it's not exactly what he wrote, but what I got from it was that if you have an AI in the driving seat and then the humans are verifying, it's kind of like being the driving teacher sitting next to the person who's just learning driving. And you're like, and now you have to constantly stay vigilant, and that we're not really good at vigilance. And that it's much easier to internalize the automation and let just your brain take care of the stuff, because it's much easier to just drive yourself, because you don't have to keep watching like, oh no, like, do I need to brake here? Or
maybe in the future for us as technical writers would mean that we will need to be more and more of SMEs of our own fields. Right now, the contract between us and like the documentation team at the company is that we write words, you give us the content, and then we review the content. But I think the more and more we start to incorporate AI and the faster we can work, the more we will need to be these SMEs. We will need to have the knowledge.
It's an interesting question. You could also think about it. This was one of the topics we were supposed to talk about. We should just, if you have a larger body of content, like how do you make it fit together? How do you create coherence between the different parts? And I think that one of the biggest roles that the tech writers have right now, especially tech writer as an editor. So one part is is this good documentation? Does it follow the style guides? And there's a couple of these assertions that you can do on your documentation if an SME is generating part of it. But then ultimately, I think one of the most important roles is like, does it all fit together? And do we get a coherent whole where people can find their way through? I think that is the harder part. Or I don't know, maybe an AI can do it. Maybe they can like turn soup into coherent story.
I think it will be more harder for AIs, like for current language models. I think like what's called this term, like the percentage at which they can remember the stuff that was already said to them, that was already known in this specific like instance of a conversation. They have a hard time, right? Keeping that in mind. Because right now, at this time, I think we're beating them at that. So, and it is kind of also creativity. I really wouldn't want to let go of this specific aspect of technical writers' work of creating this cohesive message and like thinking that like imagining that you're a user, you have this task, and like what you will be like step 1, step 2, step 3. It is a whole like UX kind of part of technical writers, like UX discovery, UX research, right? I hope that we won't need to delegate it to AIs. I mean, it would be great if they could help us for sure. Yeah, I'm all for it. I'm a bit of a skeptic, to be honest, on the whole AI topic.
It's for sure a hype. It's for sure a bubble. The question is like how much is going to be the bubble residue? There was another concept that I got from Cory Doctorow. It was like, that really makes a lot of sense. It's like, some bubbles just explode and they just create a crater, and some bubbles explode and afterwards they give you things like transatlantic fiber optic cables that then spark really cheap internet for generations to come, and that's really valuable because it helps society to move forward as a whole. Like coming back to this topic of like how do you create coherence, like how do you bring it all together? I know that you've been part of the data world before, so so you actually can compare how it is to be writing in Markdown versus how it is to be writing in data. And that's really interesting because for the people in the audience that haven't heard of DITA stands for Darwin Information Type Architecture, which is an XML language for writing documentation. And it's really useful, especially if you have like really modular pieces of products that you want to document separately, but then you can like combine them together to create a bigger whole. Or if you need to do a lot of translations and you have several pieces of your documentation that you want to translate in a module and then combine them together again to save costs. So you have worked in DITA before.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I have worked. I've been writing. Yeah, for 2 years it was. I had like, it is my mother tongue in markup languages, and then like after DITA it was so much easier like, to use Markdown. It is like you were speaking Chinese and now you have to speak English kind of situation.
Yeah. So what's the comparison? Like, how do you feel now relatively about these two? Like if you compare DITA versus Markdown,
they have their own place for different types of documentations, different types of tasks. I think it also depends on how many resources do you have as a technical writer? Like, do you have an engineering team, a developer team who would help you build out these features for your dev portal, for documentation on top of the language that you're using? Because with DITA, you already have a set of tools. You already have that, like this tag, it means that it creates a radio button set of radio buttons, or this create tabs, this create this, this create that. And then it's so easy to build on top of that. With Markdown, you have so many different custom builds, configurations, and you will need to build your own configuration for your own task because like it is the entry threshold, right? That's very high in DITA. So when I like started at F42, already like I worked with DITA, it was so much easier to work with Markdown, like just to breathe. And then like my colleague, he was not a technical writer. And then I think because we were working in Markdown, it was easy for me to bring him on board to explain what to do, how to use, like, I think we already know, like, instinctively, because it is the same rules that are applied everywhere in markup kind of like fields, for example, like the asterisk, two asterisks mean bold, like you don't need to learn this stuff. You just already know it if you've been on the internet. So like the threshold, the entry threshold is so much lower in Markdown. But then I find myself using like other, like having to figure out brushes to use when I need more complicated thing, like for example, for our homepage, I use divs, like the div elements, like front-end element, just because there is no such thing for it in Markdown. I cannot like align the header to center it and then align the text to left without using some kind of like tailwind or like just another type of like front-end layout, like help with that. And so it is the threshold entry versus cost of maintainability. Is that it's easier to get into Markdown, but you will need to pay your price to figure out how to show the new features that you want to build for the engineering team to build for your dev portal. It is the other way around in Dita.
It's much cheaper to get started, but then when you start extending then you start doing all kinds of weird things.
And it's also not transferable. For example, like how engineers build this component, like we are using this kind of like grid, the component with cards. Like, okay, I know how to use it, but then if I start using, like, if I go to another company, they have their own version of Markdown, right? And it all lives there. So it is this also aspect that I was talking about the entry threshold, but then you'll need to redo it every time for every version, for every flavor of Markdown that you will be using in other types of projects, right?
And is MDX, because like one of the big, this was at our API the Docs conference, before the AI the Docs conference. That was the last one that we've done, but the conference before, we had a lot of people talking about MDX and a lot of hype about MDX as like the next thing. So, and for people that are not familiar with this, so Markdown is not really a standard. It's basically, there's a set of rules where they're kind of loose-ish, and there's lots of different flavors and people make their own flavor. But now there's this MDX, which is about actually embedding JavaScript and HTML inside of Markdown. And now you can basically do whatever you want. It's kind of like HTML, but
that's what we're using. MDX.
That's basically So it's basically HTML in your Markdown kind of thing. Is it helping with this problem, or is it making it worse?
I mean, the problems that I described are the things that I have to deal with in MDX. So and again, like you said, like bringing HTML and Markdown. If you need to bring HTML and Markdown, maybe you could just
use Markdown.
Because it is.
Or maybe just use HTML then.
I mean, it is easier. Like for example, like I would say for if someone out there would have a question, like what should I use? Like for example, I have 2 rows. I can go with Markdown. I can go with Dita. What should I use? If you are incorporating other stakeholders' work, if you work with just like collaborate with other people, like with engineers, for example, they need to like commit stuff into your repository, use Markdown because it will be easier for them, like to not to do the things correctly, because like people without having proper like onboarding on Dita won't be able to do it without issues. It will fail the builds, all this stuff. And then if you know that you have like a dedicated team of technical writers, that other people don't collaborate into your repositories, that it's only you who are like committing this commits, stuff like that. And you are all onboarded, you have time, you have resources to do that, like to do this. For example, like you have a long onboarding time, like you expect people like to spend 6 months just like to get into your style guides, already have like a proper way of setting up things, then Dita can be a way for you to do that. To do things.
I was just thinking, because we have been doing some experiments with AI and retrieval augmented generation. And one of the issues we had was that when we were processing text, it was like, because it was an output from Javadoc, I think, or one of these older tools. And every code, like in the code samples, there was parts of the code samples were in a span. So there were, the HTML of it, there were like separate chunks. So basically every line, if I understood the problem correctly, every line became its own thing. So the code sample was not processed as a whole. So we actually had to like set up a scraper that was going to like just take the HTML output and then scrape that to be able to turn it into something that would actually make sense for the LLM, so that you'd have good content chunks. Now, where I'm getting, Dita does content chunking really well. And I'm just wondering if maybe like going into a world of AIs, if it wouldn't be even more important to have proper chunks going forward. This is an interesting thought.
It does, right? Because it does all the layout of the marking itself, because like you mark every component, right? This is a separate paragraph. This is a separate sentence in the paragraph.
Yes.
This is like an inline image. And then with Markdown, it's more of not documented like entirely in code.
Yeah. Interesting. But there's also there's a Markdown flavor for Dita, but I don't know how much legs. I used to go to Dita conferences 15 years ago or something, like an awful long time ago. And then I was talking about open source tools for data back then. I don't know how much it's being used right now, because maybe you could do Markdown for authoring and then just have tech writers do chunk the content and then compile it using data tools. Maybe that is a possibility.
But it's easier, right, to convert data to Markdown to data.
It's true. It's that tricky question of how do you create a coherent whole, and it's really weird because we have the same problem also we build developer portals in Drupal, and Drupal is a content management system that's like super structured, and you can do beautiful things, and you can mark, but then we then end up working with customers, and they want to do Doxys code, and Doxys code totally makes sense, and there's a very good use case for that. But then you end up with like something that you import from a code repository into your content management system, and it feels a little bit like going backwards. It's like,
in what way?
So I don't fully understand it, but it's like you have these constraints. Where do you put the constraints? I think this is the question. Also at Markdown. So Markdown, data, content management systems, all of these, they're basically, you have this one way of doing things where you have zero constraints. It's just, you throw in some asterisks and it does something. It's there, there's some words, good luck. And it's like super, super easy to use. And then you can add more constraints. You can put your constraints in linters, where you then have like an automatic review that will check if your text is structured the right way, if you have the right words, and so on. But then, like, what if you have 20 departments and they're all doing their own work? They're all different people. Some of them write really, really long pieces of text. Some will write really short. Like, how do you create consistency, and how do you make it all like connect to each other? I feel, I don't know. I don't know if these constraint systems, like content management systems, where you basically have a bunch of, it really becomes part of the system that helps you process the information in a structured way so that the constraints will be applied. And then hopefully it becomes easier to bring them all together again. But then we have this throw it into Git's approach, which is like, and we have this conversation, and actually it's public conversation. So in the Drupal project, people are now talking about, should we do documentation in just GitLab, and just every single module has its own GitLab pages thing. And we just give up. We don't even try to create a coherent whole. Or do we like import from GitLab the Markdown into Drupal, and then we bring it all together, and then we add additional metadata structures, like searching? You can do also GitHub pages or GitLab pages, but
there is this like topic of creating structure out of chaos by just like embracing this chaos that I can understand. Like, for example, like a similar thing, I think the issue that we had is like because we like on our platform, we have other companies' algorithms, processes that we sell, right, and data provided by data providers. They all have different ways in which they name their things, in which they like just like market their things. And then like there is the like aspect of specifications that we already touched upon. And it was such a like my eyes were bleeding when we had like a list of all the like different algorithms that we had. Like we don't have it anymore, but we had like a long list of different algorithms, and it was like all different styles, different capitalization, the same word used twice with different like hyphenation. This one is hyphenated, this one is not. You need to have a strategy for that. So you can't tackle all the chaos. Like, for example, these Drupal projects, right? You can't have full control over every bit of like every piece of documentation that people are putting, because it's their like project. They know the details, and maybe like other people want to describe their projects differently. But you have to have guidelines. You have to have some structure in this chaos. Like, okay, like the names are the names that you want to name them. Okay, we won't mess with that. It is your marketing strategy, right? But we will have a structure for our page. Like we need to have this info, this info, this info. Like maybe it's not all required. This section is optional. This section is optional, depending on your use case. Maybe you don't have like the training data to give us. Okay, you don't have this information. That will skip it. But then like the repetitiveness of templates, it's something that's very close to my heart. Like for two reasons. The first one, the customers, imagine that you are going through different products, different products of the same nature. And then you have this info, maybe like, what is this product doing up here? In another page, you have it like down here, because then like it starts maybe with a picture or something. And then it all has different structure, and you cannot really quickly compare it one product to another, because you have to readjust yourself to the new structure all the time. Like, let's take it easy on the readers. The second part is like the technical writing part, is that it is easier to write things when you already have a template, when you already have a structure. And then like, like when you were talking about constraints, there is this one like saying that like just like I remembered, like it's about creative writing. It says the lack of constraints is the greatest kind of toll of creativity. So you cannot, the idea is that like imagine yourself, like you decided to write a book, you just sit down and then like, I can write about cowboys, I can write about space. And then you are over there and you will never write anything. But if you have a constraint for yourself, right? I will write about cowboys, that's it. Then you have like this urge for your creativity to burst, because you have the frames, and you need to have the frames. Even technical writing is far from creative writing, but it's especially when you are the person who are maintaining just like the consistency, and technical writers are the maintainers of consistency. People don't know the difference between American spelling, British spelling, this word with a hyphen, this word without a hyphen. You are there, the gatekeeper of consistency. It is just like a natural extension of this role, I think, to be there out there to create these templates and guidelines for people to use it.
So it's the constraints that actually make it easier to process the information. So it's the constraints. Well, quite a few episodes back, we had an episode of the API Resilience podcast with Alicia Guerrero, and she's really, really interesting person. Her primary role was as a philosopher, but now she's running a software company that's doing biotech-related software. So it's a vector analytica. They keep track of disease vectors, and she has this really amazing concept of enabling and governing constraints. And it's that constraints actually enable systems to work. I'm sure that I'm not doing full justice to it, but she has two books about this also. Context Changes Everything, and then the other one is Dynamics in Action. But the heart of the idea is that if you want to have a system that's able to react to the environment and then to do something based on that, we have this, like the scientific or the engineering mindset, which is this deterministic mindset. It's this idea that you can create a system and it's going to be perfect. And like you're trying to build for perfection. But then actually that's not really how it works. And it feels that software used to be deterministic, where you were trying to create a software piece that is always going to do exactly what it's supposed to do. And nothing more, nothing less. And it feels that with AI now we're letting go of that. And we're going towards non-deterministic systems where we're actually positively embracing the unpredictableness and the surprise of,
like, tell us what you can do. Like,
figure it out. Exactly. Like, so did you develop any new capabilities, dear model? If you look at this engineered world that we spend our lives in versus the biological worlds, there's some really interesting parallels happening there now. And constraints is like a really, really interesting thing to play with, because you can have enabling constraints they're like, for example, APIs or actually all interfaces are enabling constraints because they constrain what is flowing through them so that they enable something else to do something more interesting with it. So like if you have a partnership, if you have an API, it's a constraint on the information that's flowing through it. Because you have like an API mask, a data mask that's structured the information that flows through it. And because it is structured, now some other software that builds on top of it can do really interesting things with it. And like also when you go from data to information or to knowledge for sure, it's almost always the constraints that are turning like a whole bunch of data into something that's like, oh, look, there's actually an insight here.
In the way of comparing our interfaces to like the logical objects, I think that we often talk about user paths in documentation. We talk about audiences, like this page is for this audience, this page is for this audience. I was talking like in the beginning of this podcast, right? Like we have this page for like intent for developers, this page is for like decision makers who are not engineers. But it is unpredictable in a way that you don't really know how people will interact. You cannot create like exact user profiles, reader profiles, and now with GDPR, you can't even track anything. You cannot collect any type of cookies. It is very hard to. So it is like this different. Like you can try to direct a river in the way that you want to, but it will go where it wants to go, in the way that your role as a documentarian is to track the changes that are happening. Is to like if you have metrics, try to get these insights from metrics, like how are people using, not like, is this page popular? It is something that we all want to see sometimes, is this page popular, is this not popular, like, is there a typo, is there an issue? But it is low-level questions. The high level, it is how are people actually using it? And what can I do to make it better? You can direct a user to a certain degree, but then at some point you'll need to embrace what they're doing. You need to, because like you want to be there to lead it. Otherwise, it will be just like all spread out, and then your intention will be in conflict with the user intention. It is not what you want to have out of the documentation, right? It is this the aspect of unpredictability, I think, that is like that product people are keeping in mind when they're releasing product feature. You don't really know how people are going to use it. You have your understanding, but then there is always like this 20%, 30% of something. It is the same of documentation. Like I think of documentation as a product in this way, that you release it and then you observe. That's your role. Observe.
I'm still chewing on what you said earlier, that documentation is also an interface. Because from that perspective, like what you were just saying, that you don't really know how people will react. You're not sure how they'll use your documentation. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to give them a constraint that helps to accelerate the journey, so that they get quicker to like a state that you're okay with for them to be at. Because you might have people doing things with your product or with your APIs that is completely out there, and like you really don't want them to do this.
It is also like the constraints in the sense of creating templates and like rigid structures for sections of the same type is for there not to be any like stones in the way of this river. So if a user wants to go to somewhere like else, not where you wanted them to go, you want them to go to there as fast as possible. It's not stumble on a specific page and figure out maybe it answers my question, maybe it doesn't, like maybe it has this information. You want them to have like an anticipation of what they will see and what like from where they can get the info that they need, so that they can move faster to where they actually want to go. I'm thinking of it this way.
Well, what I was just triggered to think about was in the major keynote. It was said like either we need to make our documentation much better, or we need to get rid of our documentation. I was like, how do you dare saying this utter BS? Like,
how is it the only two options that you have? Like I'm sure there is something in between. Like
yes, like documentation never ever goes away. It's like well, we have some games where you can just guide people through, but then the documentation is part of the journey. So we talked earlier that Up42 also has a marketplace and a developer portal. And I am sure that there are certain capabilities that you have as a company that somebody might use either your API straight or work with some of your marketplace partners. Now, as a business persona, you probably feel like the marketplace is for me, because that's like I know how to buy stuff. Would a business persona go to a developer portal and start looking at the API straight documentation?
So we are currently reimagining the way that our marketplace should look like. And then I can start from this question and then go back to the API reference, this developer journey question. So the way that I think about it is that marketplace is the first touch point and documentation is second, third touch point. So think about this, you go to a shop, right? You see something laying here, I don't know, t-shirt, something. Okay, that's the first touch point. You saw something beautiful, something that has that is SEO optimized, right? So you could search it on a search engine. So you found it. It grabbed your attention, but then the insights, the actual products that you are going to buy, you are taking, and then you're okay, it's made from wool or something, and then you can check the instructions, right? You can wash it with this, you cannot iron and stuff like that. And this is the actual day-to-day questions that you're going to ask yourself when you are going to buy this t-shirt, right? So it is the same, this marketplace documentation division for me. The day-to-day instructions, step-by-step tutorials, specifications, technical information is something that should be and is hosted on documentation. Yeah. It is something that technical writers are the most equipped people to deal with, and it is our job, right? Currently to stay on top of the updates, to check in our case, we need to check the specifications that providers have, their product manual, stuff like that, while we create some space for the marketing team to go and do marketing things instead of figuring out how to document this stuff. They don't have to think about it because we're already thinking. So for me, it was that the marketplace is the first touch point that has search filters. I think it's very important thing to have, search and navigation. I'm so obsessed with trying to perfect the navigation, and it's still I don't know, maybe I'm too biased. Every time I'm trying to assess our navigation, we need to think, we need to come up with something. I always trying to perfect it, but in the marketplace sense, you need to have a very robust search filters. You'll need to have what is right? How there's no other way for a customer to find the things that they're looking for if there is no great categorization, tags, something that you can come up with. And and for documentation, it has the limitations, specifications, tutorials, all the, you name it, right? So this is for me the distinction between one and the other.
But I think there's a third one. The whole marketplace thing got really, really popular because everybody was looking at Amazon as I would like to have something like that. Look at them. They're making gangbuster money.
It's also a very loaded word. For example, when I think of marketplace, maybe I think of something different that you think, right? Yeah. Go on, yeah.
But it's it feels like marketplace triggers corporate greed normally because the C-level starts seeing the dollar signs we're gonna be like Apple and take a 30% cut on everything that flows through us. This is going to be amazing. Or we're going to become the marketplace that you buy everything because Amazon is where everybody goes to buy anything. But when I buy a phone, I don't go straight to a marketplace. I go first to a review site. I look at some YouTube movies, and there's a whole bunch of how am I supposed to use this tool and how is it going to be right for me kind of contents that I'll first process before I go and then actually go and buy something. And I think we are kidding ourselves when we say we're going to have docs and we're going to have a marketplace and that's enough. I think we're actually kidding ourselves because there's this, the way that Amazon works is that they have affiliate links and a whole bunch of people are spending a lot of energy creating content to do comparisons because they make money on affiliate links. So I think you could say that maybe that's the marketing's job in explaining how you're going to use either or which one you should use in what case, and that kind of content. But there's there's a missing piece there, and like I've yeah.
We can, I think both like documentation marketing can address it from two different angles. I already mentioned, right, the educational like type of articles that we have with comparisons with tables.
Yes.
It is like, for example, in a situation where the marketing team would create like a blog post or something, go into the details, like with this narrative, we would have it just like a simple visualize it in a table. It is the same thing basically, but like in two different formats. And I mean, obviously, I'm because I'm a technical writer, I think that the technical writing way is the best, because like our documentation is timeless. And like, for example, when you see that blog post was written like in 2017,
yeah, you
might have some like doubts, right, whether or not it's up to date. But with documentation, especially when you don't have any indications, like it is we can have a discussion whether we need to have dates, like whether it was when it was updated, stuff like that. But generally, this timeless aspect of documentation is something that I think it is a trust signal also of the product and people. It is also like it's a social contract that we were talking about. The thing that I see here, I can trust, and there is no indication that they shouldn't trust it. I also wanted to, before we went too deep into another topic, like these developer journeys, thing that you were talking about earlier. So like so the way I think about it, is that we can't force the developers to read the stuff that they don't want to read. Sometimes they just want to have the API reference, the SDK reference. They don't want to read anything else. We can try to think of a way to incorporate these little bits of info here and there, maybe try to spark the interest, when you have maybe a term that is not just like a term that you need to explain, then maybe we could have a link, right, to a section where you explain it in more detail, or you could have maybe visualization of something that it is a certain extent to which our power over user journey. We don't have all the control over how people interact with that docs. And again, with this, the way I was thinking about what is our purpose of technical writers, for example, considering that we are part of the more larger product team, is that when product teams develop features, there is a way that they want to see it documented, and it's not always the way that you will document it, because they think about it from the point of view, okay, this is what we did, this is how great we are, this is what this is what did not exist and now it exists. But sometimes it is not how the user wants to get this information, and you are there to be, this advocate for a user, and it's the same, I think, with developers. So you are always an advocate for developers, and you will be there to spark the interest. You cannot force anything down their throats, but there are ways, different creative ways that you can come up with, right, to try to do that.
I think these are embedded solutions or solution embeddings. So one of my stories right now is that developer portals are becoming solution portals. There was one company that instead of calling it a developer portal, which is about the persona, they called it a development portal, which is about the action, whoever that action is taking. So a long time ago, I talked about interface portals, but I was way too abstract and nobody got it. It was just people what have you been smoking? Kind of but although that I hope that maybe in the future we'll still have interface portals, but that's for later. But I think so. I started looking for how do you what you just described. So the developer has an idea about what they want to do. They want to use an SDK, so don't bother me with your marketing BS. It's just give me my SDK. But then you can still drop in a little side block saying Adyen has this on their dev portal, for example. If you go to Adyen's documentation for terminals, they have the terminals, choose like in-person payments terminals. Then they have this little block on the side, our standalone solution. If you don't need a fully featured API integration, you may want to use standalone terminals. We offer countertop and portable terminals that have a built-in printer. These can be used as standalone terminals, which is basically, okay, we figured out that you want to build a terminal API integration, but do you really need to do this? Like, shouldn't you just buy one? Like, how many terminals are you going to be using? And like, why do you want to build a custom terminal?
And it's also a beautiful solution, like that it's like in this grayish like box, and not just in text, because like I really like including, incorporating these elements. You don't really have them, but like I want to have them like here.
So I think that's an embedded, it's like a solution embed. It's like where you have another solution that people that are trying to use a certain API actually might want to use instead. What we are currently researching is there, so the assertion I've made is that the whole developer portal as like a standalone thing is like that because there was a period where the focus was very, very strongly on developers specifically. And it was like, developers, and now there's a backswing. And instead of always having to do an API integration, maybe there's other solutions, and maybe that business persona might be technical enough to be able to like evaluate different solutions against each other. And then you could imagine a solution portal, this is how we call it currently, where you have not only technicals, like things that you do with your APIs and your documentation, but also things from your marketplace. And like you bring them all together so that you're on that solution portal, you're serving like a business architect or a business person that is trying to make something happen. They're not sure if it's possible. They're like shopping around, trying to find out different ways of doing it. And then they can like compare different ways. As like, so if you would use our APIs and then you have like a worked example, you would use this API and that API, and then you don't really explain how, you don't really document. It's not a tutorial, but it's like you would use this API and this API together, and then you get this result, and this is how it looks like. And then that becomes, it's like a pathfinder kind of exercise where you guide people through your like rainbow of solutions so that people can find the right solution for the right job.
I think this, like the navigation aspect of it, the searchability, the discoverability is the most important, like the hardest question that we have to answer. I haven't answered it yet. Like I can talk to you about like how to document stuff, right? How to like describe something, how to create a template that we've talked about, but like the perfect navigation, the perfect like, and the incorporation of different paths together, there's like snippets here and there, all this guidance. I don't know, it's such a still a big mystery for me that I want to just like try out several different options. Maybe like sometime maybe I'll find an answer and then I'll share it. It is difficult, right? Because it is like you don't want to be restrictive. You don't want to be like, you don't want to annoy people with like a lot of links to related sections. You don't want to have their attention dispersed over different stuff, because like the goal is to complete like an action that is described, for example, on this specific page, but then you want to let them know that there are different options. Like what is the healthy percentage between like giving links to like incorporating other like related documentation in the section, or just leaving them alone and having it as a standalone kind of like article, something.
It's like solution ads on your tutorials kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's a pattern disrupts. All of this is a long time ago I learned about stickmergy.
What is it?
Stickmergy. It's the way that ants find their way to food. That is something called stickmergy, and it's basically the way it works with ant nests is that, so you have ants on there like walking around, like going all kinds of places, and then like they find food, And they're like, oh, then they go back to their nest. And as they go back to their nest, they put a pheromone trail on the environment, so that the next time that an ant is like wandering around and it finds this pheromone trails, like there's food if you follow this. And then and then that ant comes back with food, and it strengthens the pheromone trail. And this is how you have this wandering path, and then still also this consolidation of ant highways in the environment. And it's just a really, really nice and interesting solution for exploring the solution space or exploring the food space around the nest. And that they've developed, and that works really, really well. So now, and you could wonder, like, is there similar stuff that we could do to make it easier for our customers to find their way to our solutions? And I am imagining, like, with AI, you can do some really interesting things. But I think that's the.
I was thinking like the number of views like certain pages have, so that maybe people could compare whether this page is something that other people visit, and maybe that's something that will answer the question, like a heat map, maybe of some kind.
Or like most people clicked on this link, and then maybe you can like jump across. But it's I think that the bottom line for solution portals, this is something we're exploring right now, is can you create so keep your dev portal, keep your marketplace, but then make also a new portal, a solutions portal, where you start documenting the most useful, the most important things that people do with your products. Mm-hmm. And then you explain like the different versions that you have for it. So that's something that we're exploring right now.
Yeah, it does sound interesting. It does sound like something that I also like aiming to tackle, just like in still like being in the restricted by the way that our documentation is structured, still have this type of like, I mean, the user journeys and like actual like concept to product paths is the most important thing. But we spend our time documenting like objects and
yes, because it's easy.
Yeah, I mean, we also need it. We also needed like stones, like foundational stones for ourselves, maybe also to understand what is it that we are documenting in some ways. Mm-hmm. But it is that you have to use these stones to build a house at some point. Otherwise, it is like it's someone like throws a bunch of like, I don't know, like cut out like telephone numbers at you. It doesn't mean anything. You'll need to have like, if you have a problem with plumbing, call this number. You need to have this like if then, and then like it will be. You will need to figure out how to document it in the way that is appealing. That like, because I would assume that it would take a lot of time to write a page like that, to write a like section like that, like to do this UX discovery first.
Yeah,
and then you will need to make sure that your resources are like you focus your resources on documenting the
most important ones.
Yeah, right. Makes total sense. It is so like I'm like you mentioned AI in this topic, and I hope that AI can expand our understanding of what we can do with the developer portal, with the documentation website. Maybe there is something that we just can't think of because we are, like this. It is similar thing to a course of knowledge when you can't like imagine how it is to not know things. Also like because we've been exposed to more or less the same structure of documentation websites. And I imagine you like during the Dev Portal Awards, you've seen like, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds, and you already have an expectation of what it should look like. And maybe like just like an entity, something that doesn't have these pre-existing expectations, can think of something different that can be done.
Yes. Yeah, like I think like, and you could do like a multi-step process where people come in with their questions, they post them to the AI bot, and then they get some answer, which is generated with a vector database that goes across all of your stuff, and then comes back with like, okay, maybe you can do it with this and this and this, and then there's a, do you want to get advice about this solution? And then it sends it to an architect who reviews it, like, is this really true? Like, it doesn't make any sense at all. and then if it makes sense, it's like, oh yeah, actually this makes sense. And then you reinforce that pattern. And then maybe if a lot of people search for that same thing, then you can start maybe creating dedicated documentation in your solution portal for that specific use case.
Remember when you said that that maybe we could outsource to AIs like this, the creation of this cohesive like narrative on the documentation. So maybe like the other way around is that we as documentarians will become this UX research people in the context of documentation, creating coherent documentation experience, while AIs will be dealing with documented objects, documenting like how to create something, how to remove something, like this how-tos, stuff like that, will be there, like just like manipulate and orchestrate all these bits and pieces of information. Maybe will be this like the...
Because of the nature of, well, there's two layers, because one is like the training of the model. So if you have the money, because it costs a lot of money to generate, like to train your own model, then that can help you with driving coherence, because then you can train it on the language that you think you're supposed to use in your organization, and then the content that is being generated by it would be like cohering into a similar direction, because it's at the coherence triggered by the model. There's also divergence, because you can use it to generate new answers that might or might not be true, and then go and validate them and then build them further out. So there's coherence on the language use, which is something that you normally would use a style guide for. So probably like a combination of style guide and an LLM together might do something like that. So there's that one aspect. But then there's also coherence of, does this whole thing make sense? Like, do all these pieces fit together?
Yeah, I was thinking about the coherence of architecture of itself.
I think that's for humans.
Yeah, because like I don't think AIs would be able to do UX research, because like at first like you need to speak to. I mean, like I think you do analyze data, and like AIs can analyze data for UX research, but then like the other part, doing interviews and coming up, like it can help you come up. I'm sorry, with hypotheses, stuff like that, but then. And it can I think come up with like a bunch of different answers to this hypothesis, but you'll be the one who'll be making the final call, right? Like,
I think that the reasoning is something like LLMs for sure not, but yeah, I think that the reasoning, that's where the most value lies, where the humans can do. I like the idea of the coherence piece. I learned a lot already from our conversation. Like this, I got a lot of new insights.
I also feel very inspired, like to the topics that you brought up. I like already have a bunch of ideas that I think I will implement tomorrow. Start to like not today.
Before we close it off, is there something you would like to pitch? Is there something that you would like our audience to go and have a look at? Or something that you think is interesting, or that you would like people to have a look at?
I mean, apart from checking out our documentation, I don't really know, to be honest. Like, yeah, I don't have a blog. Like, I want to, but it's somewhere like in July or something. Yeah, I'm really inspired. But like, I really look forward to working closely, collaborating with the technical writers, like European-based, because like I know that in the US there is a very strong community out there, and we're out here like building it as I see it. So yeah, just like I don't have like a place to direct people to check out, because I don't have any stuff on my own right now. But just looking forward to maybe hearing out from the people who will get inspired maybe from our conversation, something, hearing out their ideas and just like collaborating with them together, figuring out something new that we could do.
So like, if I can rephrase it, so if there's technical writers who are listening to this, or people that are seeing themselves as technical writers that are living. You're in Berlin, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Then it would be great to meet up and to exchange notes and to like inspire each other. Is that's a good rephrasing?
Yeah. I really look forward to meeting other people. Like right now, we're just like 2 people at our documentation team. It's a bit of an echo chamber. So like personally, I always like reading this. Like I'm there in the Slack.
The Write the Docs Slack.
Write the Docs, right? Yeah, and like here, I feel like I'm not alone.
Are there still meetups happening in Berlin? Because I know that Chris was used to do them.
There is an event, but there is nothing scheduled for this year.
Okay. Go in like Chris Chinchilla, like go ping him, and I'm sure he would be happy to oblige. I've done a presentation about DevPortal so a long time ago at one of the Berlin meetups. But I think that was before Corona, so I don't know how things are right now.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much, Daria. This is really, really, really lovely conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And like you were driving it like so well. Like I was like you were constantly fighting like another like thing to build on top of the existing conversation. Like you have this like academia kind of like type of thinking that I think, I don't know whether you've been like, I'm not sure. Like I only have bachelor's in English, so, but I really like appreciate this type of like narrative that you created during this podcast. It was really helpful for me.
Thank you. I'm sometimes worried that it's a little bit too connected, or it's like associative. I think that's the right word. It's just like, ooh, there's some nuggets here, and let's explore that. But I love that because it's yeah, and it was you really good guest. It was great. It was a very good conversation. Got a lot out of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode. This episode of the Resilience Podcast was brought to you by Pronovix. You can learn more about our company at pronovix.com, and thank you for listening.